Welcome to Learning to Glow, a show about wellness, skin health, and self-development. I'm your host, Jess. I'm a mom, entrepreneur, and skincare expert. I'm so excited to share tips on how to achieve healthy skin and bring amazing guests in the field of health, fitness, aging gracefully, and personal growth. Let's explore all different ways we can take care of ourselves as women, both inside and out, to truly shine. So let's get glowing. Hi everyone, welcome to the show today. I loved this episode and I cannot wait for you to hear it. We have Rhiannon, who is a certified functional nutritional counselor and board certified health coach with the American Association of Drugless Practitioners. She focuses on individuals with the MTHFR gene mutation. We're going to talk about that today, what that is. And she shares so many ways to get optimal health in this episode. We talked about what the gene is and how people who have it have certain roadblocks that need to be addressed. I actually have this, and so it was really interesting to hear about it and what we can do about it. And there's a big population of us who have this. She talked about how testing is so important and such a great tool for figuring out how our genes are affecting our lives, along with solutions to that. I know a lot of moms who listen to this podcast and this episode are going to be very interested. If their kids are chronically ill, if your kid is always sick, if they're always having ear infections, if they have certain diagnoses like autism, ADHD, or they just want to get ahead of, their family's health and on the right track for their families and themselves, you'll really enjoy this episode. You can find all of the links to follow her and also the website in the show notes, and I hope you get as much out of this episode as I did. Welcome to the show. I am so excited to have you today. We are talking about something that we've never talked about before on Learning to Glow, and I am guessing that most people listening to the podcast right now haven't even heard of this topic. So I'm thrilled to have you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
So happy. Okay, so before we get started on the topic of today, which is we're talking about the MTHFR gene mutation, I would like if you could just introduce yourself a little bit for us. Tell us about you and maybe your journey, how you even came to find this work. And being, working in this with this specific, very, niche type of work that you're doing. Tell us how you found it.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Rhiannon. I'm a certified functional nutrition counselor. I'm board certified health coach with the American Association of Natural Wellness Coaches and a board certified member of the American Association of Drugless Practitioners. And I actually started as a functional nutritionist after I had been diving into all this research for my own family, and I'd been helping support other families as well. But what I really focus on now is supporting women and their families that are neurospicy. So those of us with ADHD-like symptoms, right? And being able to provide simple solutions for optimized, customized wellness without spending endless hours on Google, and to go from that frustration to focus and clarity. So how I initially got into this was kind of by accident. I think that's how most people really kind of learn. They kind of fall into something or something shifts in their life. And my daughter she was born missing part of her immune system. We did not know that until she was about 2. She was chronically ill, couldn't figure out why. And so finally, me being the former science teacher that I was, dug in and just was looking at research for that. And our pediatrician, very holistic minded, I text her Sunday night at 10 o'clock and was like, "Hey, Dr. Wickham, sorry to bother you on a weekend, but here's what I think's going on." And she texted me back. She's like, "Do you think it's this antibody?" And I said, "Yes." And she's like, "Let's test her." So a $29 test gave us answers on something we were looking for. And at that time, we were already making dietary changes. We were removing dyes. We were removing gluten. Dairy was one. She had MSPI when she was young too. So I'd already, when I was nursing, was going dairy free and soy free and all of that stuff already. So making that next step in our journey, right? So we were already using herbs and oils and all the things that I could to possibly support her immune system. And then it got to the point, because we were treating her so much with antibiotics, that her gut was just tore up. She ended up with a head to toe yeast infection. And that's when I was like, you know what, we're done here. We're not doing this route anymore. We're focusing on shifting and going the natural route. And she hasn't been on an antibiotic since, knock on wood, like ever since then. And so I'm very proud of that as not only a parent, but, now also as a practitioner, she's my first science experiment. Okay. So when we moved,
that's how it starts.
it is really, it's like trial and error, trial and error. Oh, this works. That does not. When we moved from the Midwest down here to Florida, we got a new pediatrician, and that pediatrician tested for MTHFR, didn't tell us. I had no clue what it was. And then she only tested for C677T, but when the results came back for both the kids, because she tested both kids, my son's heterozygous for C677T, my daughter's homozygous. I was like, what the heck does this mean? So of course, rabbit hole again, right? Started diving into things and making new changes and all of this stuff. But the very first thing we did was get a vaccine waiver for her, because I was like, you're already immune compromised. We've already got all these things. I already knew, because I worked for a chiropractor, I already knew about the potentiality of that. We had a family history of injuries with vaccines and all of that. So that was the step that was like, we're making sure that gets done first, which I'd already done, right? Like the personal belief exemptions and all that we'd already had done. So that wasn't anything new. It was just like the legal aspect of that I was like, let's make sure that's covered. And from there, it was like, all right, what other dietary changes can I make? What lifestyle changes can we make? Like, what vitamins can I do? Because we're already doing that with other practitioners, in the Midwest, because we had tested those things to see how we could support her immune system. And so I went down that rabbit hole, and then I just started learning. And then all of that, I was helping and supporting other people. And I had a video go viral on TikTok, and I was doing some coaching for another business with another guy. And that video went viral, and he was like, I think you should be doing something with this, because clearly you're passionate about this and you know what you're talking about. So I was like, okay, maybe. So that's sort of like the following year, I was like, all right, let's actually do something and actually make this a shift in my career. So that's how I got to where I'm at.
That is amazing. I really relate to a lot of what you're saying. I've talked a little bit about my story on my podcast, but not in detail. And, when you have a child who's having symptoms and issues and immune issues and gut issues, and you're kind of in a mainstream world of medicine, it's very difficult, and you really have to do a lot of work on your own and be an advocate for your children. And
Yep.
It is hard. It's confusing. And then the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. That's why it's so important that we have people that can help us and guide us. And if I would have known about you when I was dealing with all of this, it would have been so amazing. And I think that it's just so hard to know what to do. And you can start with the basics. I always say, you start with the basics, look at the diet and the nutrition, which I want to talk about today. But this is like when I had a great doctor. I was really fortunate. I have this really great doctor, and he tested me for this without telling me, and I have it. And so I was like, what does that mean? And what does that mean I need to do? So I think maybe we could start with, what is this gene mutation and maybe how it affects us in our health?
Yeah, absolutely. So MTHFR doesn't stand for what you think it does.
I know. Every time you look at it, I'm like,
yes. And I always joke that the people that think that are my kind of people, because you have to have a little bit of fun with it, right? Like, you can't be like, oh my God, I'm going to die. It's a death sentence. Like, no, it's when you know how to help and support it, you can live a fully functional, optimal life. But there's so much more that goes into that. So MTHFR stands for methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. And essentially it's an enzyme. And when we cannot process that effectively, all these things with methylation can be problematic. So you can experience symptoms of ADHD, autism. There's so many: pregnancy loss, blood clotting, cancers. Methylation is tied to hundreds of biochemical things in our bodies, and detoxing is a part of that as well. And so the problem that I find as a practitioner is most people only test for one or two SNPs. So that's the single nucleotide polymorphism, or the gene. And they don't get a broad picture of what other things are playing into that, because there's multiple genes that tie into methylation. MTHFR is just the the one that everybody talks about, right? Or that you hear about more often, or, oh, maybe you should look into this, but it's not just one. And so cherry picking just that gene can be problematic because you can't see what else is going on and if that's activated or any of that stuff.
And so
Yeah.
when you found out that your daughter had this, like, what were your first steps? And I'd like to know, like, say you just get your diagnosis, like, where do you begin? Because I can tell you from, like, a lot of the, I was in groups and I was in, this type of diet group and that type of diet group. And there's all these different
Mm-hmm.
communities of moms coming together. And it's like, oh my gosh, like, it's so overwhelming. So, like, if you had to say one thing to start and focus on, because we are already overwhelmed in this society, like, where do we go? Like, what do we start with so we're not
Yes.
like drowning in overwhelm?
Absolutely. So I actually just made a post about this the other day. If I was to start my journey over, what I would do differently, because it
Okay.
took me, before I became a practitioner, 7 years, like researching and looking and like applying and like trying things and guessing, right? Like firing in the dark, hoping that thing was the thing, right? That made sense or made things different or whatever I was looking for at the time. And so the very first thing that I find that most people struggle with is having a clear path of what to do once they have that diagnosis. We'll use air quotes here, of knowing that they have this gene. And that is because most testing out there doesn't provide you with tools to what to do. And so that is the first thing that I would have done over. I would have found somebody that testing, and maybe at that time that didn't exist. Maybe it was new in development, but I didn't know better, do better, right? And so now as a
Right.
practitioner, even if you've already had testing, like, we're retesting you. Like, we're starting over with this specific kind of test, so you know what you need to eat, so you know what lifestyle changes you need to make, and so you know what supplements that your body are recommended. And then we can look at those and see, okay, just because you have this gene doesn't mean it's activated, right? Like, that's what epigenetics is. It's like turning on the light and turning it off. Like, how we live our lives, the foods that we have, the stressors, all those things play a factor in our gene expression. And so you can have it, but it not be actually activated. So that's why also it's important to zoom out and see all the other genes, because I test 150 different genes. So in my kids' case, right, it was just one for each of them. Like, that's the only one. And I'm like, but there's more MTHFR genes that she should have tested for, right? And so that's one thing that I would definitely say I would have done differently, that was different on my path, right? But for us, it was obviously supplements and food changes. And we were already on the food changes with leaky gut and things like that they were dealing with. Food dyes are huge, especially, dairy, gluten are high in they're inflammatory things. So having an anti-inflammatory diet. But there's also certain foods that for some people their body doesn't like because they have histamine issues, right? So there's no diet or one size fits all approach. And that's where I feel like is very frustrating as a practitioner, because people will come to me and be like, oh, I saw on TikTok that I need to be taking this, so I'm starting to take it. And I'm like, but do you know if you're actually undermethylating? Like, have you had your homocysteine
Mm.
checked? And so just because you have the gene doesn't mean that it's expressing or problematic right now. Could it be if you're really super activated and, you're stressed and living a crappy lifestyle, eating tons of processed foods and, fast food all the time or whatever? Yeah, it absolutely could. But if somebody leads a healthy lifestyle and they've noticed some changes going on, then that's something to get curious about. So it's not a death sentence. It's just one of those things like, let's get curious and see, really to dig deeper. But with her, we really focused on just switching more towards changing her diet, supplementing. But again, I wish I would have had a comprehensive test that just told me what to do instead of just like, yep, that's the gene. Next. Now what do I do?
Yes. I mean, that just goes back to how bio-individual we all
Yes.
are, and how there's no one size fits all. But there are some basic things. Like you said, my child could not have food dye.
Mm-hmm.
It was literally like I gave him a drug if he
Yes.
had something with red 40 in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, yeah, I have another kiddo who is, I mean, this immune system of his is just something. I'm so happy for him, because it's just strong.
Mm-hmm.
But he could get away with certain things, right? Like we can get away with different things when with what issues that we're dealing with. And one son who's just like cannot, there's just no way he can handle that. So I'd love to talk about just maybe some benefits. I know it depends on the person and everything like that, but as far as food and lifestyle and nutrition, some things to consider, because I know that not all kids, need to be strict and adhere to a certain type of diet and all of those things. But just generally, like other than food dyes, what are a few other things? And I know you mentioned gluten and dairy. I mean, those are the first things that we got off of. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd love to just talk about a couple other ones that just
Yeah.
generally, especially if you're dealing with issues. And I always say too, like, I have friends who their kids are chronically ill or they have major skin issues. Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a skin person, so I always say, like, that's an alarm system when you're
Yep.
having eczema and breakouts and all of these issues and they're sick and their stomach hurts. It's like, okay, like, it's not just going to the doctor, to the dermatologist. It
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, it makes me so sad, because it's like, no, that is not the solution. They're not going to do the work that you need with your
Yep.
child dealing with these symptoms. So sorry, that's a
No.
tangent. But tell me some things that you think like it would be good to just take off the table for, until you get things sorted out.
Absolutely. So I just to circle back on what you're saying though, it's so important. I think so many people go to a specialized care provider for that thing when they forget that their body is one whole system, right? Like we have different parts of that system, but it all works in conjunction with each other. And so if you can't find the root cause, slapping a band-aid on it isn't going to fix the actual problem. And that's always generally geared, especially with skin issues, towards gut health, right? And so making sure that you're working on the inside because the outside's going to show it. So there's, I'll go on that with
Yeah,
you.
well, I mean, and just one more thing on that too. I love dermatology. Like, thank you for saving so many lives.
Right.
Like, skin cancer is real. But
Yes.
like, I've had too many people, because people talk to me about their skin because I'm an esthetician, and
Mm-hmm.
but I also know about how the body works and how,
Yeah.
from personal experience too. Like, my son had the worst case of eczema
Mm-hmm.
ever, and it wasn't because he wasn't using the right skincare.
Right.
That wasn't it.
Yep.
So, I got a message saying like, oh, I'm having this irritation on my skin, and all the dermatologist did was remove her off her skincare and just told her to
Mm-hmm.
use a plain, like, CeraVe or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, and then what?
Yep.
So it is so important to, I really, if I could only have one message on my podcast, it would be this, you need to look deeper. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
reason why all of a sudden your skin is reacting. You're having these issues, rashes, whatever it might be, whatever type of skin
Mm-hmm.
disorder you're dealing with. So that is like one of the biggest red flags that you see, especially like that was the first thing in my son that I saw.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just, it's an important message, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, and your ability to detox is compromised, right? And so your skin is a huge detox organ. If you're not
Yeah.
sweating or any of that stuff too, it's so important. So yeah, so circle back. I know you'd asked for different things that people could do to hop off of, right? So dairy and gluten were one of the first two as well, and dyes, artificial sweeteners as well. So I don't know about your son's situation with red dye, but my son's situation with red dye, he was like a raging lunatic. He was so
Yeah.
aggressive and so rude, and I was like, "Where are you getting this behavior from?" Like he would sit on his sister and just beat her up, and I'm like, "You don't do this at school. Like, where are you getting this from?" And he was literally like a whole different kid within a week of getting him off of those dyes. And so now, as far as behaviors and those types of things go, I would definitely say dairy for sure. If you are like, oh, I don't know about all these things, dairy for sure. Because I'm working with an adult client right now, and she struggles with really bad anxiety and focus and concentration issues. And we've been working for about a month, and she's like, I feel so different. And she went on vacation and slipped some dairy into like her, what she was doing because she didn't plan ahead. And I was like, you just told me I could have helped you, but so she was like, I was so anxious. And so like it was crazy the difference. And she's like, now I know at least I'm not crazy, that what we're doing is making a big difference in what I'm doing, right? And for little people, they can't express themselves to be like, Mom, I'm anxious. Like it just feels different. And they likely are going to have an outburst or an aggressive behavior or something like that because they don't know how to handle or manage those big feelings. And so that dairy and that gluten piece is a huge, huge thing. But making sure that your kids are getting adequate water is also so important because a lot of kids don't. I mean, a lot of adults don't. I mean, I was telling my kids the other day, I like have my emotional support water bottle, right? Like I take it everywhere with me. It's in the car. It's like, but growing up, it was like my parents had Pepsi and like Mountain Dew and like there was no water. So it's just like sometimes we forget to make sure that we have those. And electrolytes especially too. Like you can drink all the water you want to, but our water's not living like it used to be, right? So it's dead and not full of nutrients. And so you can be dehydrated and still have a lot of water. So making sure your kids are getting balanced electrolytes free of dyes. So no Gatorade, no Powerade, none of that stuff, especially if they're athletes. Get a good high quality electrolyte into their regimen. And then if they're having any other focus or concentration issues, then dig a little deeper. See why. Like look into their dopamine receptors, look into their gut. Like all these things are tied together, and start to kind of figure out the pieces of the puzzle, not just one piece, which is what I tell people all the time. MTHFR is a piece. It's not the whole puzzle. We got a whole puzzle together. So.
Yes. Oh, I love that. So I have a question about electrolytes and the water. If you don't want to buy an electrolyte, you can make one. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So generally, if you want to do something like organic lemon juice and some Celtic salt, that's a great alternative to be able to get those electrolytes in. If your kids aren't fans of lemon, totally get that. There's a brand that is actually here local to us that I actually just stocked up this morning on it again, and it's all clean ingredients and I really enjoy it. But otherwise it's kind of hard to find some that are dye free, that have no added junk in them. But if you want to just make it, absolutely easy way to make it. It's just that, or coconut water also too. It's a really good alternative.
What is the brand of electrolytes that you like?
Oh my gosh, I would have to go grab the bag.
Okay, maybe you can tell me after.
Yeah,
Tell me after, and then I'll put it in the show notes, because I'd be interested in that. Like, and especially in the summer, right? We have so much heat. We're sweating so much. Kids are in sports, even though it's hot. So I think it's really important to make sure we have that. And I forget too, because I go on electrolytes and then I forget about it. And then, you hear something like, oh, this one has crap in it. And you're like, oh, forget it.
Yes.
I feel like this journey is a little, you have to like hang in there, because I think a lot of this can be, it's so different, right? And you see other families and other friends, and they just can eat whatever they want. And it can be very challenging. But I think that it's like, that's another reason to find help, because somebody to hold your hand through it and talk to about it, because it's stressful. And I feel like it can be, it can be lonely.
Yes.
And especially when I first started this, when I was going through all this and trying to figure out how to help my son, there wasn't anyone I could talk to about this in my circle. So I did have to go out and find, other people who are dealing with this. And a lot of those kids had, like you said, autism, ADHD, and a lot of other issues. Like what other things do you see in children, that like diagnoses and things like that you're like, okay, this could be that they have this gene?
So when I work with kids, and I generally have worked with the parents first, right? So we already know that the children likely have that. But what we want to focus on with them could be like fatty liver, for example. I've had kids that have come to me that are like 10, 11 years old that have fatty liver and weight problems. And fatty liver, your liver is congested. Essentially, it can't process and do the things it needs to, and methylation happens in the liver. And so making sure that liver is functioning optimally is huge. And so that's where doing their blueprint and being able to be like, okay, well, these genes also are coming into factor, and this is why they're having more of a significant impact. Maybe they have strep infection, like this child with the liver issue. She had chronic strep infections. And I was like, well, we need to look at that a little bit deeper too, because that could be pandas, so just being able to kind of think outside the box on things and how these things are coming to play are a big factor. And if kids are on medications a lot for ear infections, like when my kids were growing up, before I took them off dairy and did all these things, they had chronic ear infections all the time. And I feel like that is an epidemic with kids at this, like as toddlers and all that stuff. And it's really inflammation. It's dairy. Once I took the kids off dairy, it was like, poof, gone. And so it's so interesting, because we had tubes put in. The kids went through all sorts of unnecessary stuff, when if we would have just known that inflammatory response was happening and causing that, it could have been changed. So I used to have chronic ear infections too. In like high school, I would just be sitting up like on the senior balcony, like in pain, like with my head in some drops, like, oh, make it stop, But I had dairy then. I had no clue. And so with kids, I feel like I've tested babies as young as 8 months for parents to know, like, what their future could hold. And it's empowering for parents to have that for their kids. And I honestly wish and feel that every child should have this type of testing done, because it sets you up for like a user manual for your child to be able to go, yes, you have these genes, but it doesn't mean that you could be affected by them if you take care of yourself, instead of work backwards and have the problem occur and then have to go, oh, let me fix that, and then have to get on all these medications and all these things as an adult because you don't have the awareness. So for kids, as far as it goes with like ADHD and stuff like that, knowing the other factors like the dopamine receptors. So I do test for several dopamine receptors, seeing how that can interplay in different processes in the body. When I work with clients, I don't be like, hey, here's the Krebs cycle. Like, yeah, I taught anatomy, but I don't need to be your teacher. I need to show you how to make yourself feel better or your children. People don't care how the processes work. And I feel like, and you may have experienced this too, Jess, when you went into groups, it was like, well, this does this and this does this. And you feel like you need a biochemistry degree just to be like in the group. And you're like, I don't know what any of that means. What should I do? And so that's where I really try to take that away from people and those contradictory things, especially when it comes to their kids, because everybody wants to do right by their kids. They just don't know how. But if they have to start with themselves first and realize I have to fill my cup too, and so by doing the things for me, subsequently my children are also going to benefit from that. And so therefore, when I'm making changes for myself, my kids are going to experience those changes too, because your lifestyle's gonna be changing, your diet's gonna be changing, all that stuff, and you're modeling that. So it's like a 2-for-1, right? So I have a client right now, and she has ADHD. Her kids have a lot of like food issues and things like that. And so I was like, well, I know we've got these things and that's a whole other battle, but let's focus on you. And her kids are coming around. Her kids are like, ooh, I kind of want to try that food. Ooh, what are you eating? So they're seeing her make these changes and they're also making the changes. And so it's a good reminder, I think, for parents that we have to pour into ourselves first, because our kids are just going to benefit as much as we do because they're seeing the example being provided.
When I first started my wellness journey, I had already been in the skincare industry for years, working on client skin and as an educator for multiple skincare brands. When I learned about how the toxins in our personal care and beauty products could have a negative impact on our health, I knew I needed to make a change. I was used to the result-driven products that I was working with, and I was not happy with the natural products on the market at that time. Although they were safer and cleaner, they did not meet my expectations for results. I created Simply Just Skincare to deliver the results my clients demanded from their products while using natural, toxin-free ingredients. You can check out my clients' results and reviews on my website, simplyjustskincare.com. In 30 days, my clients have reported more hydrated skin, less appearance of fine lines and wrinkles, and more of an overall glow. Our top sellers include our Repair Toner, our Hydrating Undo Serum with hyaluronic acid, and more. I am offering my listeners 20% off their first order with code PODCAST. Check it out in the link in my show notes to get glowing today. When I started the big diet change that we started, my son was very young and very picky, which is very common, for especially these kiddos. They have their foods that they like, and that's that. And it's not usually broccoli. Yeah. So we really struggled with that. That was so difficult, like trying to get his gut back in order. It was like, he's not going to be sipping warm bone broth. We had to really get creative and find ways. And really, it was heavy on the like reward. I remember one time it was like, have one bite of this. It was like a stew or a soup or something. And I'm like, I will buy you. We bought this like big superhero like figure, and we're like, just one bite and you can have this thing. We're like, if he just tries it, like he'll get it. But it could be so hard. And then if they're older, that's hard too, because they're stuck in their ways and they can say no, or they can go to friends' houses, or they can, and I do feel like I've seen all of those stages, and my son's kind of to a place now where he can say, I know what will happen if I eat this certain way. And, he doesn't eat it. And I know there'll be times where, and he does say it sucks, he's like, I wish I wasn't gluten-free. It's terrible. It's so hard
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, especially when you're in a group and all of that. But I think they come around, and if, like you said, if we're modeling, that goes into their head, and they'll come around. Sometimes, like, we've gone through ups and downs, and then I'm like, I've seen it come back around as well.
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk a little bit about detoxification too, because that's something that is more of a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you recommend for promoting detoxification in the body? Because that's something that's harder for people with this gene.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I work with people, I do take a three-pronged approach. So we look at your genes, we figure out what your dietary changes, because some people's dietary changes are going to be foods that are recommended, but maybe their body in real time can't tolerate it, right? So then we have to work on that issue as well. But if we're talking about like the detoxing and lifestyle stuff, the very first thing is to getting rid of the toxins in your home, what you're being exposed to, and reducing your toxic load. Doesn't matter your genes. Everybody needs to get rid of that stuff, right? So not storing your food in plastic, not reheating food in plastic, not cooking on anything that's not either stainless steel, cast iron, or a ceramic, right? That's been proven to be non-toxic and healthy for you. Making sure you're getting rid of all the plastics that you cook with, right? Because all of our stuff is like generally plastic that we cook, or measuring cups, or any of that type of thing. So completely like detoxing your home is a huge portion of what I like do in my program. Is like I have what I call a scan and swap. So download apps to like scan things in your house to see how toxic they are, and then swap it with something else. And I just have an Amazon list so people could just be like, buy and done. So they don't have to think about it. They already know it's vetted. It takes the stress, reduces that friction, and they can go from there. So glass storage containers for everything. My friends always laugh because like if you're around me, your lifestyle will change. It's just a part of being around Rhiannon, because like here's my favorite glass containers. Here's how I cook. Those types of things. And so it's just funny because that piece for so many people, they don't even have that awareness. Like, I can't store my food in plastic. What? And then candles and air fresheners and deodorants and, body care products. And so that is a huge part of detoxing in itself, because you have to detox your environment. And then once you reduce that toxic load, then you can start working on your body, right? So what foods are you eating? Are they organic? Are they part of the Dirty Dozen? What are you buying in general? Like, is it a GMO product? Like, we need to get rid of those things too. So when it comes to the body portion of that, you can do dry brushing, you can do lymphatic massage, and your genes will actually give you recommendations when we get these blueprints back of different things for you. So some people will get like Tai Chi, some people will get, especially for like stress reduction, for like massage therapy, some will get yoga. And it's just so interesting. Wow. Like, so when people are like, oh, I can't wait to get my results, I'm like, I can't wait to see what your genes tell us. Like, that's so fun to me. So, but in particular, we have done detox fasts for a long time. That was one of the first things like that we really hit home on, was doing detox fasts. And we just do, Epsom salt and baking soda. Washing your fruit too is a huge thing. Some people will just like plop it out and eat it. Gross. We actually lived in Mexico for 6 months, and I bought organic blackberries and I brought them back to our place, put them in the purified water because Mexico, and put vinegar in there, and there were maggots crawling out of them. I was like, this is why you don't just eat them. Those are going in the trash. Like, ew. So, and I saw somebody else the other day, blackberries too. She had a maggot on hers, and I was like, this is why you have to clean your fruit. So let it soak for 20 minutes with like vinegar and baking soda. But, making sure that you make these small but simple choices in your life to reduce your toxic load so your body can also begin to function. Because if we can't detox you if you're still surrounded with all this crap, it's just not going to work. So detox fasts are a big one. That's an easy thing, especially for kids. And that's what my kids now, I just ask them, when was the last time you took a detox bath? I don't know, I'm gonna go take one. So mine are 12 and 14 now. This is a lifestyle. I don't know how old your son is, but my youngest now, she will be like, I'm not eating that food because XYZ. I know how I feel when I eat this. And for her genes specifically, if she has too many processed carbs, maybe they're gluten-free, but if she has too many like crackers or whatever, she gets bloody nose. And that's one of her genes. It's dirty. And so she knows now not to do it. And she gets really crabby too if she eats too many carbs. So that's why that broader approach of these other genes and looking at them is so important, and why MTHFR is a piece, but not the whole puzzle, because there's just other important detox genes that also played a factor with opening those NRF2 pathways up and getting things to be able to move. So so many little pieces there, but
Wow.
detoxing the home is the
That
big,
is
big deal.
that's such great information. I love that. I love that you can take a test that can actually give you recommendations of which is the best ways. That is I am going to talk to you after we're done recording. I
Yeah,
need to
for
take
sure.
this test because it's so funny because I know a lot of people when I first started going through these lifestyle changes. This was 10 years ago, 11, maybe even
Yep, same.
closer to 12 years ago. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And people thought I was crazy. And I think that a lot of times, and a lot of the moms that I talked to, we weren't doing this because everything was fine. We
Yep.
had sick kids, and
Mm-hmm.
or we were sick, and it's like
Yep.
you get to a place where you're just not being helped, and you
Mm-hmm.
can't find the answers, and you either just give up and you live
Yep.
with it, or you have to do this hard. It's hard. I'm not gonna lie,
Yep.
like it is hard at first because you're
Yep.
used to the conveniences and all of
Mm-hmm.
that type of a thing. And like I had to reteach myself how to cook.
Yep.
I'm Italian. I used to eat bread like as a fork. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's a different way of
Yeah.
going about things. And I'm not perfect at all by any means, but I was closer to that when we were in the thick of it and we were dealing with
Mm-hmm.
the more acute illness.
Yeah.
And one last thing before we wrap here, but I'd love to talk about like just what I said, like when I was first starting with all of this, it was confusing. And I love how you take the guesswork out of it for your clients. You're like, okay, here's a list, because how many hours did I spend researching things? I don't know. But
Mm-hmm.
when you're first like saying, okay, you know what, I want to take out some of these major things just from the get-go that could be causing some problems for my children or myself, like the food dyes, the dairy. Do you have
Mm-hmm.
some easy, maybe like substitutions or things that you can start with that aren't feeling overwhelming? I mean, I'll tell you right now, my favorite breakfast is Greek yogurt. And after we've been talking today, I'm like, I need to rethink that. So maybe you can give us a few tips. And I love my yogurt. Oh,
I know. So and this is something most people don't know, so I'll just drop this little knowledge bomb. You may know this, but other people may not. So dairy and gluten have different parts of them that essentially attach to receptors in your brain that make them hit the opioid receptors, so it becomes addictive. So if you're like, I'm craving carbs, or I'm craving bread, or I'm craving milk or cheese, like when I went dairy free when I was nursing my youngest, I was like a crackhead. I was like, I just want some cheese. Like, it was crazy. But once I realized
yeah.
and found that out, it made so much sense because it does hit your opioid receptors in the exact same way that an opioid would. So it becomes addictive. And that's why people like constantly lean into, oh my God, I want to have carbs, or oh my God, I want to have, you know, the dairy. How can I give up dairy? It's so hard. Well, you're going to feel like crap for a little while, right? That's like the
Yeah.
keto flu, essentially, because you're detoxing from all that stuff. But when it comes to food substitutions, finding other solutions that are going to fill that void, whether that be a texture void, because some people like need that dopamine hit with crunchy food. That's me. I need that. So if I'm having too much soft food, I need to counteract that with some toast in my pasta or something like that, and I will have spaghetti squash for pasta, even though you can eat gluten-free pasta, but just for carb sake, because there's a lot of carbs there. But spaghetti squash is a great one to swap out for that, and you're not going to have not only the gluten, but sometimes if things are enriched, and I'm sure you know this too, you want to stay away from enriched foods. So things with folic acid in there. Folic acid is a big no-no for us with MTHFR. And so anything enriched, like flour, or, that's why they say get rid of gluten, because that is all in there. Cereals, breads, that's in there. And to stay away from that. So that's an easy swap, is just looking for gluten-free things. And there's way more options, Jess, than when we first started this journey 10, 12 years ago, right? Like,
Oh my
so
God,
many.
yes.
Canyon Bakehouse is like my bestie when it comes to bread. Like, it's the most actual bread tasting bread that there's any brand out there. And I will add this too, that's non-food related. The biggest piece that I feel like a lot of people miss on their journey of health and wellness, especially when it comes to dietary changes and like just the supplements, like the report tells you too what supplements are recommended. But the third piece is your stress management and your lifestyle. Like, nervous system regulation. Because if your nervous system is jacked up, none of the stuff that you're working on is going to stick. you're constantly in fight or flight, your adrenaline's going to be going. You're not going to be able to absorb nutrients properly. So you could still be doing all these awesome things. But if your nervous system is just a complete wreck, it's a no-go. And so that's why in part of my program, I have experts come in and do different modalities and share like, hey, here's some past life regression for you. If you need to go back and fix some trauma in your nervous system that's lying dormant, here's some energy work on these different things. And here's how, sound therapy can help between the vagus nerve and B12 absorption with MTHFR. So I really think that it's an important piece before we hop off to address that, because you can really be doing everything right, but nothing could stick if that one piece is not taken care of. And that's why they say stress is the silent killer, right? Because our nervous system is constantly haywire, then the things aren't going to last, and you're not going to sustain the changes you're trying to make. And then you'll beat yourself up, and then you come in a whole loop of shame, which is a whole other thing that you put yourself through. So that cycle is one to really focus on. That's crucial with this, because that stress management is going to determine if those genes are on or off.
This is so huge. Like, I'm so glad you mentioned this, because it's literally like, especially going back to us dealing with our children, they're sick. What's more stressful, right? Like, nothing. And if you don't have the tools to help take care of you, and I talk about self-care all the time. It's not just a buzzword. It's real. Like, we have to do this to be healthy. It's non-negotiable. And there is a lot to be stressed about. And they're having those tools like you're talking about. I love that you bring in energy work. I do Reiki too.
Yes.
And it's so powerful. It's such a great way. If you have trouble sleeping, Reiki is like one of my favorite things. And of course, we know sleep is crucial. So I could literally talk about this all day. You have shared so many amazing things. I know people are going to want to know more, because there's so much more to learn about all of this. So tell us about your program. Tell us how to find you. And I am excited, because I feel like I could use your help as well. So tell us how to find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can actually, if you want information on comprehensive testing, you can text my number and you can get some information. So let me get that for you here, because it's always one of those things I'm like, oh, my personal number, all the things. All right. So it's 321-335-2414. And if you just text the word test, then you'll be able to unlock access to a short video as to what it all looks like what the report looks like. I run through all that. You'll see a few testimonies. And with all my services, I've now included not only a painful option, but also like Klarna Affirm Afterpay. So people have the flexibility. So there's no barrier of entry, so to speak, because some people are like, oh, I want to do that. It's out of my price range. Well, let's work together to make that happen. So I wanted to make sure that was no longer a piece of resistance for people, and they could still get the information that they absolutely need and deserve to have. So that is a big piece there. And then you can also go to my website at www.revitalizing-wellness.com. And you can find me on TikTok and Instagram at MTHFR_coach.
I'll link all of this in the show notes too. So it makes it very easy for people just to find you. And, I can think of a few people just off the top of my head who need to talk to you, because this is, I always say it's like, it's a mystery that you're trying to solve. And if you don't have all of these tools, if you're not somebody like you, it's hard to do. And it's hard to get to the bottom of what, these issues are. And I feel like I've talked to moms and literally in the last month who are like, don't know where to go. They're desperate for information. I have one friend who said something like, the nutritionist was like, there's no need to make any changes to the diet. And this child is having a lot of issues. And I was like, how can you say that? So this is just I know. And I'm just like,
it's so frustrating
with what I know. And I know so little compared to like what you do, but even I know like that is absolutely the craziest false information I've ever heard. And we're not taught this stuff. And we have so much to learn as moms and trying to take care of our kids. It's like when something does come up, we need the support, to get to the bottom of it if we can't find it through our, the mainstream ways. So thank you so much for sharing this. This has been so amazing. And you'll have to come back and share again.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me, Jess. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please subscribe and review so we can reach more people who want to learn to glow alongside us. See you next time.